All right, let's look at chapter 22, opera. All right, so we're going to take a focused look on opera in this chapter, also one particular composer of early opera named Henry Purcell. First, I want to describe and define opera for you. If you're not familiar with it, you may have seen cartoons about it or picture the fat lady with the helmet of horns on, but that's not all that there is to opera. Um, Opera was a very important new genre during the Baroque era. Remember, they're all about pomp and circumstance and showing off and drama and expression of emotions. And so opera fit the bill for this very importantly because what opera is a large scale drama that is sung. So instead of, for instance, a difference of a musical to an opera would be you've got some speaking and some singing. This is a very general definition. So in a musical, you've got talk, 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 then stop and sing, then talk, 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 then stop and sing a song, right? You can even look at that in Disney movies, which are basically musicals. And so with opera, all of it is sung. There is kind of that division of talking and singing. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But all of it is sung. It's a sung drama. Remember, that's channeling back to the early Greek, where they said that music helped add to the emotion of it. So it was putting together this music, this acting, the poetry, the scenery, the costumes into this heightened hyper reality exploration of entertainment. Okay, so I want to explain to you a couple of important things to note about opera and what it's made of. You've got something called recitative or recitative, and then you've got something called an aria. Let's talk about the recitative first. Recitative is what I would liken to the speaking parts in a musical. All right, so this is text that's more conversational, it's more plot development. It's going to have the action of the story and move the story along. And it has a lot to do with how the rise and fall of natural speech occurs in sentences as you're speaking it. And when you listen to recitative, you might not go, oh, yeah, that sounds like someone speaking. It's still someone singing, but it's much more free form and much less song like than aria. Okay, so that's like the speaking parts in a musical compared to the aria, which is the song, the stop and sing about it. So the song is going to be much more emotional. It's going to have a character really focusing in on a certain intense emotion like grief or love or passion or fear. The action is not moving forward during this time. This is literally the stop and sing about it. Picture a Disney musical. Action is moving forward, and then we stop and we sing about it. Let it go, let it go. I think of Frozen. I'll spare you listening to me sing that. Though I think it would be very entertaining for you. Um, but these arias could actually be pulled out of operas and sung on their own because they were songs with a beginning and an end. It wasn't just didn't just make sense only in the course of the opera. It made sense as a song. So they actually were performed outside of opera as well. Um, there weren't just solo singers, although a lot of opera is about solo singing. They also had numbers for ensembles, and ensembles could be duets for two people, trios for three people, quartets for four people. You get the idea. Choruses were used as well, which backed up the solo voice and maybe commented on the action. And it was all orchestrated, meaning the orchestra is going to be playing instruments to support the singers. So usually you'd have something called an overture, which the orchestra would play this overture to introduce the piece. Many years ago, um, for instance, I'm thinking about Mary Poppins. When you start Mary Poppins, you've got the whole credits being seen on the movies. That's an overture being played. A lot of times it had little snippets of the songs that would be heard in the opera or in the piece, but sometimes it stood by itself as a complete uh, separate tune or separate type of musical composition. But that was just for the orchestra. And then you also had these things called symphonias, which were little musical interludes that happened between the scenes as you transitioned the scene. Here's an example of a painting of an opera house. I want you to think about this being a very important place to go. But if you notice on the bottom where the people are sitting, you've got some people standing and talking to each other. This is maybe hard to see, but if you could see a little closer, you would even see someone selling some food. Uh, the idea of us stopping, sitting quietly in the dark and watching a piece without making any sound was not how opera was when it was getting popular during this time period. It was very much a social and aristocratic thing to do. So you may not pay attention to everything that's going on the stage. You might be having private conversations, political conversations, maybe flirting with women, maybe getting a snack. And then when someone stopped to sing something really good, a virtuoso singer starts to show off, then everybody's attention's on the stage and they start to pay attention to their favorite singer. Another word I want you to be familiar with is libretto. Libretto is an Italian word meaning text. That is the script of the opera. All right, so those are the words that are sung, not the music, but the words. It's referred to as libretto. A lot of times, the early librettos during early opera were pulled out of ancient history or based on mythological characters or even epic poetry. So that's where the librettist would get his material. And so the librettist and the composer would pair together to have that musical language, to be able to display within music what the words were saying and to develop the characters. In Italy, this was where it all began. Remember, I mentioned the Florentine Camerata. And so people were already interested in theater. That wasn't a new thing. But royal weddings, ceremonial occasions were very, very appropriate for things like this. And so they just kind of grew naturally out of the people's desire to have these scenic displays, lavish spectacles. And so it began to spread all over Italy. There's an early Italian composer named Claudio Monteverdi who was very famous for early opera. He kind of took it from the palace to the public. The first public opera house was built in Venice. And so people, not just at the king's court, but people all over could be exposed to music like this opera. And having the orchestra being accompanying was standard, and this style spread all over Europe. People went crazy for it. And in fact, there was a style in France that was growing, the national style, um, at the same time. So if you hear opera around the 18th century in France, it's going to sound a lot different than in Italy. But from Italy and most of other Western Europe and even into America, the Italian style of opera was the most popular. Opera in England was based somewhat similarly to Italian opera, but they had some different versions. They had stage plays, which incorporated a little bit more dance music, and that was enjoyed particularly among the aristocracy. One of the English composers that is most well known that we were going to listen to a piece from is named Henry Purcell, who was an English court musician, a composer, worked at a church as an organist, also a singer. And he did a really good job of assimilating the Italian, the French, and the English styles. He has a lot of different output musically of masques, operas, also sacred and secular vocal music and instrumental music. There's a little picture of him there with his fancy hair. The piece you're going to listen to is a tragic opera called Dido and Aeneas. And Dido's Lament is the piece that you're going to listen to, which is a very powerful song about grief. It's based on an ancient Roman epic. The audience would have been very familiar with this story. If I mentioned to you Romeo and Juliet, you might be familiar with that. So it's the same kind of idea that they would have all known this Virgil's Aeneid, the story of Aeneas, who was a hero, Dido, the queen of Carthage, and falling in love, the tragedy of love lost. And there's another character named Belinda, and you'll hear her referenced in this song, who's Dido's serving maid. Here's a picture of some artistry based on the story of Queen Dido. The plot summary is that Aeneas was shipwrecked at Carthage, met the Queen of Carthage, Dido, fell in love, but he was called away. And she's so grief stricken that she takes her own life. And the opera ends with flames from a funeral pyre, which is the thing they set on water for someone who has died. And that is what actually lights the way for Aeneas' ship. Quite sad. So take a listen. See what you think about this. Think about that solo voice. Think about what you hear in the chromaticism, in the melody. The recitative occurs first, which is Thy Hand, Belinda. And then you're going to hear very, very simple accompaniment with that. And then you're going to have the aria, When I Am Laid in Earth, which is her song of grief. Okay, you're going to hear something called ground bass. That's that continuous bass that we mentioned. And it's going to be in triple meter. So take a listen. You'll have the listening guide in here if you want to pause this and pull that up. It'll have the words, even though this is in English, so you can follow along, and it'll give you some hints on what to listen for. Thank you.